Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome. We're going to get started now. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late. My name is Tariq. I'm Al-Shabaka's US Policy Fellow, and I'm also the host of our Policy Lab series. It's been now 2 years since Israel launched its genocide in Gaza, and much like 1948, 2023 marked the beginning of what has become a rupture in Palestinian history that will necessitate a comprehensive rethinking of our struggle for liberation. But the consequences of the genocide in Gaza extend far beyond Palestine. Western complicity and inaction, when presented with the never again moment we've all been warned of for decades, has exposed the true face of the so-called rules-based order. And with the era of unchallenged US hegemony potentially coming to a lengthy yet turbulent close, we're asking now the question of what the future will look like for Palestinians and for a world that is undeniably on the cusp of profound transformation. So in today's Policy Lab, I'm joined by Leila Farsakh and Abdaljawad Omar, or Aboud, to trace the historical trajectory leading to October 7th. We'll also examine how Gaza became both the site of extermination and a catalyst for global rupture, and discuss what comes next for Palestinians. And before we jump into the questions, just a quick reminder about the format. I'll be posing questions to Leila and Aboud for the first 45 or so minutes, and then we'll save about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to get to questions from the audience. So please feel free to submit your questions by clicking the Ask a Question button. And remember, you can upvote questions that you find that are particularly important, and we'll do our best to get to them. So first, let's briefly introduce the speakers. Leila is a Shabaka policy analyst, Palestinian writer, and a professor of the political science department at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And Aboud is a Palestinian writer and assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at Birzeit University. So let's dive into this. Leila, I want to start off with you for some historical perspective. I think it would be really helpful for us if you can set the context for this discussion and basically situate how this ongoing genocide fits into the longer arc of Zionist settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and ultimately erasure. In other words, why would you say it's important that we're meeting to discuss this today?
It's very important for us to meet today and discuss it because, as you just said in your introduction, this is a major rupture moment in the Palestinian history and in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This moment of October 7, 2023, and what followed brought it to a situation, to a turning point that is as important as the 1948 moment, even more important than the 1967 Six-Day War. And this moment is important because it shows us the arc of settler colonialism in the 20th and the 21st century. And we see it referring to a policy that many people were surprised that Israel opted for a full-side genocide when in the past it did not need to do physical extermination of the Palestinians the way it's doing today in Gaza. I think to understand that, it's important to understand that any settler colonial project, and Zionism is one, even if Zionism has also professed the idea of creating a national home for the Jewish people, it is fundamentally a settler colonial project based on the negation of the natives. In 1948, it tried to eliminate the natives by ethnic cleansing. It did not need to exterminate them physically. It expelled them when it expelled 2/3 of the population from the land. I mean, at the time, there was 15,000 Palestinians estimated to have been killed. Unlike today, we're talking about 66,000. But expelling 2/3 of the population and making them refugees was a major ethnic cleansing. Israel could afford to do that then because it did not. The Palestinians were not well prepared for the Zionist project. If you think people in 1947 did not think that 1/3 of the population, which at the time was a Zionist population, would have taken over Palestine, and they counted on Arab armies. Also, the society was much more rural and not urban and as educated as it is today. So ethnic cleansing by expulsion was enough. But as the conflict proceeded, and I think Israel's strategies between 1948 and until to 2023, I think, was a strategy by which it sought to erase the Palestinian by ethnically cleansing them and negating them. So we see this policy of erasure through ethnic cleansing really worked until 1990, until the 1993, until the Oslo peace process, because the Palestinians were not recognized in 1948. UN resolution 194 recognized the right of return of the refugees, but the notion of Palestinians did not really exist in the international arena. And I think the best example of the erasure of the Palestinian politically, we see it clearly in UN Resolution 242, which after the 1967 war, which is the UN resolution that based Security Council resolution that defined the terms of any peace settlement in the region. What is important about this UN resolution is that it does not mention the Palestinian by name. It does not mention UN Resolution 181, which is the partition plan, or UN Resolution 194, which is the right of return. It only talks about peace being done between states, and it talks about the Palestinians just as refugees in need of a humanitarian solution. So in a sense, Israel had the diplomatic back support and the physical military support to eliminate the political presence of the Palestinians. It did not need to eliminate the physical existence of the Palestinians. This, of course, changed with Oslo. Also in 1993, Israelis could no longer negate the Palestinians because of Palestinian resistance after 1967, after the international recognition of the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people in 1974, after the PLO recognized Israel in 1988 and accepted the two-state solution, after the PLO accepted UN Resolution 242, which assumed that the only solution can happen between states and lead to two-state solution. In Oslo, Israel recognized the Palestinian, but decided, I recognize the Palestinian and the PLO, but now I fragment them. So the Oslo process of 30 years, which is the longest period Israel had to manage the Palestinians, in compared to 67 to 1993 or 1948 to 1967. During Oslo period, Israel institutionalized and deepened its apartheid. And its apartheid regime is based on negating the Palestinian political existence through fragmentation. And I think it's the colossal failure of Oslo, which manifested itself with the October 7th event, that made the Israeli push them towards that determination to physically exterminate the Palestinian. Because October 7th shattered not only Israel's image as the most powerful state in the region, the most military advanced, but it also shattered its essence, the essence of Zionism, that Zionism is the answer to the Jewish question, that Zionism can protect Jews inside Palestine and outside. On October 7th, Israel proved Israel is not a safe place for the Jewish people, and that cuts at the heart of Zionism. And also Israel is unable to protect its own citizens. So the fact that this was shattered on October 7th by what it considered a bunch of thugs, between two commas, or human animals, was not only humiliating, but also shattering and alarming, because also it recentered the refugee question. It brought it back to 1948, that basically the question is about who has right in this land between the river and the sea, that the policy of Israel that it used over the past 75 years of ethnic cleansing, of political erasure, of negation, of political recognition in order to fragment and empty the Palestinian state project of any liberatory potential, collapsed. And the Palestinians are still here to resist and claim their rights. And the answer to that was we need to go into extermination. And I think that's the logical conclusion of a settler colonial state when the natives resist and continue to resist.
Thanks, Leila. I think it's really interesting that you kind of chart that inevitability from the project of erasure and negating the presence of Palestinians to the inevitable endpoint, which is actual, genocide. I want to stick with you.
One point I want to emphasize is that go to genocide because the Palestinians will not accept their domination, because it tried everything, every policy, and the fact that the Palestinians continue to resist. And actually also that the Palestinians understand their enemy very, very well in 2003, much better than they understood it in 1948. I think that's very important, and also have international recognition, which was not the case in 1948.
With that in mind, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. I think over the past I mean, over the past 2 years, we've heard a lot about. I've heard a lot of people describe this moment as a quote unquote final stage or final phase of the Zionist project. And I want to know if you agree with that characterization, or when you hear that phrase, what do people mean by that, and where do you kind of see that heading in the long run?
Uh, I think it's still too early to say what is the final stage in settler colonialism. Okay, it's going to depend very much on the resistance of the Palestinian. It's going to very much depend on the regional configuration, which is not looking very promising. The Palestinian question has always been an Arab question, and it's right now it's being put again into the Arab fold, unlike the Oslo period, because the 30 years of Oslo period made the conflict just between Palestinian and Israeli, and now we're back into Palestine being an Arab question, but in a completely different context like 1948. So is this the last stage of settler colonialism? Probably, because genocide is the end of the one who perpetrated, but it's all going to depend on how the Palestinian resistance is going to continue, how the Palestinian will present a new political project that is liberatory for all those who live on the land from the river to the sea, and also on the international and regional configuration. And this is still in flux, in big flux. I will say more, but I would like give a chance to Abu.
Yeah. Thank you, Leila, and thank you for bringing in that regional and global perspective. So, Abud, turning to you, you've written a lot about how Gaza is not only a site of extermination, but this catalyst for a wider rupture in the global world order. We hear a lot about Gaza exposing this facade of the so-called rules-based world order, but what does that actually mean in your perspective? How much do you think is actually, rupturing in the long run versus just revealing what was always true about the international system?
Well, I mean, I'll start from this point. There's a difference between knowing something on a theoretical level and inhabiting the truth of it. And I think what Gaza does is kind of bridges that gap between knowing and perhaps realizing, acknowledging, and then also inhabiting this truth of how this global order, based on these liberal notions, is hollowed out, empty, used in a very selective way. And of course, even now is being destroyed by the very forces that actually constructed it since World War II. So what we get, I mean, and there's a paradox there. I mean, it's an off-ramp. I don't want to go into it, that on some level, now some of the Palestinians, at least in Palestinian policy direction, but also some of us are actually thinking that our own salvation comes from, the very same order that is being emptied out and hauled out, which I think is also problematic at some level, like international law, international legal systems. And of course, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't use all the means available for us. But I think that there's an important lesson in how, facing annihilation, we also kind of stick to any form of, we try to go to any form of survival. But I would like to go back a bit and say that October 7th is a moment of explosion, this breach, this defeat of the Israeli army that opened really a void in Israel's own self-understanding more than anything else. And I think Professor Leila just outlined some of that. And that explosion has also led, I think, to ripple effects that I would call also implosion. So this, in this sense, what we're seeing happening globally, whether it's in university campuses, whether it's on the level of media institutions, whether it's on the level of various political classes and ruler classes across the globe, is this moment of how these institutions are responding either with stupidity or absurdity. And in that sense, there's something that is being not only exposed, but it's also being, people in the UK are being, for instance, confronted with the fact of how a group that actually does action to try and prevent the sale of arms to Israel, that is committing crimes against humanity, is being now recognized or being now prescribed as a terrorist group. And for people who stand against it, for being arrested, old women, nuns, people from all different walks of life are being arrested and placed in prison based on this prescription. So we're living in this moment of absurdity. How this international, if you want, ruling classes that are still so invested in the maintenance and security, and of course in the expansion of Israel's power in our region, as you know, not only for the Palestinians but also for the whole region as a whole. The destruction of Arab life, the destruction of Arab futurity, the destruction of Arab ability to actually chart a different course. That's what Israel also manages, at least for this collective West, whatever that means. Now, I mean, is being kind of like exposed, hauled out, and you can see that absurdity interplaying. What that means politically is that it opens a space not only for Palestinians but also for all those who are interested in political change. It opens a space to reassess the relationship between peoples and their institutions, as we're seeing, you know, with new forms of politics arising. I mean, despite everything that Zohrman Mamdani has been doing to also kind of gesture towards or easing the anxiety of liberal Zionists in New York, and of course, there's a lot of that going in his discourse currently in the moment. But, you know, he wouldn't have been able to even open that space politically without the October 7th moment for him to actually stand a chance to become mayor of a city like New York City. So we are seeing this change. It's taking time, of course. It does not mean that that time of change means that Palestine will be liberated, or that we're just waiting for our own liberation. Because as Professor Leila also said, I don't believe in this kind of inevitability of things. But there are cracks in the formation of the settler colony itself, its own internal contradictions between its various tribes that compose it, whether it's liberal Zionist or the Messianic Zionist, the assault on institution that many of these Messianic right-wing groups are conducting, and the nature and the character of how many of the liberal Zionists who party in Tel Aviv and, of course, steal our food and sell it across the world because they're not much better, or they're not better at all, in many ways are engaged in this kind of internal civil war. Of course, it's not a violent civil war. They're still united, at least when it comes to the external enemy. But there's something going on also within the colony that tells us that it's not healthy. The economic breakdown, the increasing isolation. And it's also important to remember that, because I think one of the things, because of the intensity of the massacres that have happened and destruction, that we forget is that time is not only working for Israel. Time is also working against Israel in many ways. Of course, it is working in its favor in some areas, but it's also working against it throughout this 2 years war. And this is something that is different about the moment of Al-Nakba, for instance. First of all, we've been engaging in a war that is longer than the Nakba. That's one thing. So the Israelis have not been able thus far to actually decisively end Palestinian presence in Gaza or elsewhere, even though it has been engaged in the 2 year war. So the temporality is being stretched. And I don't think that temporality is being stretched because Israelis want it to stretch. I think because they're also, of course, they have deliberate strategies, planning. They want to settle Rivieras, etc. They've been outlining a lot of plans. But there's one thing that we should differentiate between how Gaza is now this bleeding wound and catastrophe in terms of its built environment, etc. And the mingling of two concepts within the Nakba, which is the catastrophe itself, you know, the depopulation of the Palestinian people and their ethnic cleansing and the destruction of their villages and homes and towns and cities, of course, and at the same time defeat. Thus far, we are not defeated, of course, in a way that actually ends decisively the question of Palestine as this messianic right-wing wants. And there's something, of course, quite ironic, I think, in all of this, is that it seems to me, and this is a provocation that we can, I'm just asking this question, I don't really have an answer to it. It seems to me that the very forces of, you know, the extreme right wing in Israel are the ones with their theatrics, with their insistence on repetition and their own compulsions, whether psychic or political, and their own drive to actually end the question of Palestine, are over-investing in this form of excess that they're engaging in a way that actually seems to me also a place where we can have some hope. Not too much hope, because hope is also betraying us daily, but some hope. because I think that structure and architecture of the extreme in this context politically is a place that we can actually think of how Israel is driving itself through this excessive exposure, celebration of its massacre, theatrics of alienating people, the inability structurally to actually really become an independent power as they want, the super Sparta, as Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned. All of that coming together, I think, will only intensify and increase as time passes, and of course, as Israel discovers the void and the hole that it actually built for itself, and that is contingent, of course, on our own sumud, if you want, or persevering, on our ability to retain our active resistance, our ability to generate institutions and organizing across the globe. And this is where the diaspora comes in, because I think now also the diaspora has a big role to play in the coming future, not only in terms of going on a protest, but actually setting up an infrastructure, media, intellectual, and otherwise. So anyways, I don't want to go into that, but yeah, I'll finish here for now.
Thank you, Abud. I mean, you mentioned how Israel is in a way digging itself deeper into this, global isolation, and you also wrote about how Israel is embarking on this quest to become a regional Sparta. Could you, quickly describe what you think that actually means for us in terms of resistance, both within, both on the ground in Palestine and as part of the global solidarity network? So how does, in other words, how does our resistance and how does our work adjust to a future in which Israel is essentially becoming or acting as or embracing a new role as this Sparta or bunker state in a way?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, I should mention it's not. I mean, Israel has a structural, again, contradiction. On the one hand, it's a dependent colony. It needs the collective West with its industrial base. I mean, I was never convinced with this argument that Israel is an empire. It cannot be an empire. It does not have that many sources of power, whether it's resources or labor or other forms. I mean, maybe somebody can make an argument what empire means in the context of Israel, and theoretically create or stitch something together that makes sense. But at least to me, Israel is a dependent colony, a small colony. Its war on the Palestinians, on the Lebanese, on the Yemenis, on the Iranians was highly contingent on the goodwill of other people's politics and other people's, the US, UK, Canada, France, all of these countries that have supplanted or supplied Israel with a lot of the weapons that are being used to actually target us. So it has a structural problem. On the one hand, it claims, look, we're a refuge for Jews across the world. We are an independent power. We will protect you from anti-Semitism. And this is where the power of the Sparta comes in, ideologically at least, that Israel is ready to be isolated because there's still that kind of, notion of we're alone against the world. This history and trauma of anti-Semitism in Europe being mutated into this idea that we should do it on our own and we should create our own forms of power. And of course, Israel has failed repeatedly. I mean, in a very I would not say complete failure, but it has failed repeatedly in actually creating or generating enough military power that it can actually stand on its own. So it was always dependent on these alliances that nourish it and give it. And now what it's seeing is that it's starting to lose much of the people's attitudes, opinions, whether in the US, whether in the UK, and across the globe more broadly. So what does it do? It has a contradiction. One thing it can do is start from now changing the legal environment and criminalizing Palestinian activity and Palestinian activism and organizing in these countries. And that's what it's been embarking on through its proxies and lobbies across the globe. And the second thing it can do is try to change the world in its own image. And this is why also Gaza is not only Gaza, or Palestine is not only Palestine, because what Israel is offering the world is a blueprint for what form of future humanity at large and its relationship with each other can actually be. Like this form of techno-fascism, the use of violence in this way, destruction and bulldozing Gaza and trying to rebuild in its place these forms of business or conceptions of real estate, etc. So there's a lot of that going on, how to kill, how to create an efficient killing machine. And we've seen even that language being easily transportable to, for example, the Minister of War, Hexeth, who was also speaking in the same language and with the same echo, with the same vocabulary and grammar. So it's trying to change the world in its image. They will catch up. These European allies in America will catch up with what we're doing, with what we're experimenting in, and we'll take them back to their own history of colonial domination, racialization, genocide, and we'll remind them of how their own countries were actually manufactured. So it's a form of also a nostalgic exercise, but being transparent in the present. So this is one area where Israel will attempt its move. This is how it will keep itself from not being isolated. And the other attempt is through the criminalization and, of course, the use and doubling down of things like anti-Semitism, etc., that we have been witnessing. On the other hand, I think what cracked open is too large for Israel to actually enclose, and that we have, as Palestinians, an opportunity today to transform this, at least people's understanding of our cause more broadly. The way Palestine has become kind of an ethical guiding point for many people across the world. Your position on Palestine determines something about you. So it's starting to say something about you. It's not only an open for discussion or debate, at least for many people that's happening. And transfer it to some sort of also political power or revolutionary thinking or whatever that actually works, because here we will probably hit some differences among even us on what is actually possible. I lean towards those who want to create revolutionary possibilities, at least myself.
Thanks, Aboud. On that note of revolutionary possibility, Leila, I want to get your thoughts on how this moment, this 2 years of genocide, not only the 2 years of genocide in Gaza and the replication of these tactics across Palestine, but how are you seeing this involve and drag in the entire region and both in terms of Israel and waging a regional war of aggression, but also regional complicity, because it's not only a matter of Israel's aggression again vis-a-vis other countries. They're also quite directly complicit. Could you tell us about how that has kind of changed the dynamics of what is actually going on within Palestine?
But sorry. Yeah, following on what Aboud also said, that Gaza, broke open and created incredible cracks in the system, in which we are again now at a juncture whereby is the world or the West and also the Middle East, gonna go into the super surveillance technology Spartan states, or are you going to go into more revolutionary possibilities? And I think it's a very pertinent question, and it is touching us deeply, because you also should not forget we had the Arab uprising 15 years ago. The Arab uprising were a very important turning point in the region, and the way it was met with was incredible repression. But it's all an indication that there is a determination by the civilian, at least, to imagine better possibilities and call for a more participatory, democratic, liberatory political engagement. It got crushed, but I doubt that it will not re-emerge again. And Palestine and what happened in Gaza, at the mass level, the Arab population have been watching and seeing, and it's definitely going to impact them just as it impacted the whole West and the whole mass mobilization happening on the world. And as Aboud said, that Palestine now becomes an ethical question or ethical position, where do you stand? And causing a various ripple effect about imagining a different politics, because it also comes on the heel of a failed neoliberal system that we have been with for the past 40 years. It comes on the heel of a growing authoritarianism that we don't know where it's going. Now, with regard to the regional question that you posed, it is also, if we look at it in historical context, particularly both alarming, but also important. In 1948, the Nakba of 1948 caused major upheaval in the whole Middle East. The Middle East changed completely within 10 years from 1948. Okay, we had the arrival of nationalist leaders, the Nationalist Party. We had the pan-Arabist ideologies, and we had the rise of military nationalistic regimes that ended up being quite destructive. But today what we face much stronger states than in 1948 regionally. Okay, regionally the Arab state system was weak, as was shaken by 1948, and led to the emergence of nationalist militaristic states that failed on the Arab front but became much more dependent on the West and much more repressive. Today we are in a situation where the Gulf is much more dominant. The Gulf and the repressive states are much more dominant. But I think Israel, to go back to the point Abu mentioned, its militaristic dimension reflects the crisis it is in, and is causing a whole different thinking also on behalf of Arab states. So while Arab states are very much concerned with their survival, the attack on Iran, and more importantly, the attack on Doha, actually revealed that Israel is not a partner or a state that you can rely on or use to further repress your population, but is actually a liability, and you need to find new ways to dealing with it. That is transient, and actually that, as Aboud mentioned in one of his articles, is that maybe the resistance was, while many Arab countries were happy to see the resistance being eliminated, they might have realized now that the resistance was not just only protecting the Palestinians, but also protecting Arab states. So how would we go? We are in a situation of flux. Syria is in flux. Lebanon is in flux. Even, Egypt is ala kaf afrit, Morocco. So we are at a moment where the old is no longer sustainable, and the revolutionary potentials are there. The question is, how can they be organized and be effective? And I think this is the question that is confronting everybody within Palestine and outside Palestine. I think within Palestine, the question now is how we're going to stop this genocide and try to reconstruct politically, not just physically. And the challenge towards that reconstruction are massive, because Israel and maybe also some countries in the region want to use the situation, which we saw also with the Trump plan, to present a new Oslo, an Oslo 3, what I call Oslo 3, a new way of managing the conflict rather than addressing the conflict. Will that be sustainable? I doubt, because it already is inherent with contradiction, and above all because the Palestinians are still resisting, and the Palestinians are much better prepared than in 48 or in 67 or even in 1993 to address the Israeli narrative, to dismantle the Israeli narrative, to articulate and emphasize the settler colonial reality and the apartheid reality. We have also much more legal weapons in our hands than before, even if the legal system is at the edge of collapsing because of Gaza and its failure to stand up to it. But we have tools, and we're able to use tools in ways that 30 or 50 years ago we were not. So I think but the question of what kind of state we're going to have, we are at it. And this is the fundamental question. How will the state evolve? Will it become more repressive and fascist, which is a line we see in the US and Israel is trying to promote, and also we see in the Middle East? Or will we need to have a different alternative? Because the problem of fascism is destructive on the self, no matter what you want. And I think in that respect, I saw one of the questions asking, did really Israel want to do genocide? If it wanted genocide, it would not have killed just 60,000 or 66,000 Palestinians. I think this is not the question. The question is, Israel, definitely we have enough discussion about what genocidal intent. And the question of genocide is not in the magnitude of how many people killed, is in what are you intending to eliminate a people in part or in whole. But what is important about it reflects how the nation state inevitably can lean towards genocide, because it defines itself on the basis of an ethnic existence rather than on a democratic existence. So the option of genocide is always there. And in this context, we did see it manifest itself and exercised to reflecting the crisis of Zionism rather than the power of Zionism. And that genocide is always destructive on the self, not just the other.
Thanks, Leila. I want to go back to what you just said, though, about the old no longer being sustainable, yet that revolutionary hunger is there. But I'm wondering how you see the last 2 years as having impacted that movement and that revolutionary hunger within Palestine. And more specifically, what does leverage actually look like for Palestinians on the ground now? And how has that changed from October 23 to October 2025? And then Aboud, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that same question.
Well, I see the revolutionary potential, believe it or not, in the Palestinian continuous resistance on the ground, and also in the Palestinians' attempt to try to revive the PLO in the loss of legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority, in the way that Hamas answered the Trump plan in a very intelligent way, emphasizing the unity of the Palestinian people and the unity of the Palestinian institutions. And the awareness of being in you have various calls also about imagining a different alternative. I think the revolutionary potential, believe it or not, is in the collapse of the two-state solution, despite the increasing recognition of the Palestinian state by more and more states. The recognition of a Palestinian state, its importance is symbolic, is the fact that the world recognizes that Palestinians have political rights and have the right to self-determination. The way this right is going to be exercised is, I think, now clear. It cannot be exercised in a two-state solution because Israel was never about a two-state solution. It can only be exercised within a democratic state that ensures equality for all those who are living on the land. Now, it is on the Palestinians to articulate that agenda. How would they articulate it? That's what's being in the process of being discussed by various groups. I think the diaspora, as Aboud said, has a very important role to play, but also people on the ground. And the people on the ground, they are both facing a big challenge. On the one hand, how to stay on the ground in the face of incredibly difficult and genocidal reality. How to reconstruct a political project that is emancipatory. But there are various attempts taking, whether it is in the Palestinian National Conference, that what took place a few years ago, whether it is on the initiative on the ground about how to define a different tomorrow, is about how you engage a new generation in politics in defining the project. But it is inevitable, just like also in 1948. Don't forget, in 1948, nobody, like we were in a situation of complete disarray in 1948. We did not have a political leadership anymore. It was eliminated. It was divided. It was not a collaborator like today, but we had, it was completely destroyed. And it took us 20 years to come up where people were working in Kuwait, where people were working in Lebanon, where people were working in Syria, whether it is through the Ba'ath Party, whether the Qawmiyin al-Arab, Arab nationalists, whether it is through Fatah, which was based in Kuwait. There were various initiatives taking place that we did not hear about for 15 years until we started hearing in the 1960s. And the takeover was after the 1967 defeat with the Karame battle and the rise of the guerrilla movement. So we will not see it in the next few years, but work is being done. And what we can see is its manifestation in the fact that today we are dealing with a Palestinian population of 15 million, 7 inside and 7 outside, okay, who are articulate, who are mobilized, who have legal strategies, diplomatic strategies, media strategies, grassroots strategies. They are working at various levels and in various spaces and with international support that was not even imaginable 75 years ago or even 30 years ago. So we can capitalize on that. We are in the phase of building, but we cannot yet know what it's going to take. But it's definitely going towards an opposition to this fascist reality we're being confronted with.
Yeah, I mean, did you want me to also... I think what I meant earlier with the revolutionary potential, not necessarily, I wasn't speaking necessarily about Palestine. I think one of the things that you can actually take in Palestine is that the question, what is to be done, is always, this Lenin's famous question is always there, And it's not even asked by political organization or elites. It's something that seeps in on the level of everyday people. because the conditions are so suffocating, because we live in this claustrophobic environment, because there is somebody viscerally and immediately next to you that is dominating you. So that question of what is to be done, even when we answer it, there's nothing to be done, or even when we fail to actually create the conditions for an active form of politics, it's still always on our minds and our back, and it's actually sometimes like feels like a burden, if you want. But I would, and it's an important question in its own right. You know, why the West Bank did not do something, and or why, you know, this moment. As much as we're like, I think currently, me and Professor Leila are giving a highly hopeful, if you want, trajectory of thinking. But there are also things that are dark matter in our. The first thing is that, first of all, Israel could succeed in eliminating Palestinians from Palestine. This is something that is possible. At least a large number of Palestinians from Palestine, not everybody, but at least a large number. The second thing is that we are fragmented. There's now a wound that is on top of the wound of what is happening in Gaza, which is the wound of not being able to act together within historic Palestine, at least, or even outside of it, that is being, you know, slowly but assuredly, you know, fragmenting us even further in terms of our understanding of ourselves, our relation to the different geographies that the colony has constructed for us. There are things also around October 7th, for instance, as a moment that also created an anxiety of liberation. What also Professor Leila was kind of hinting at indirectly, which is the idea that the very fact that liberation went from this kind of imagination to something that we actually could perhaps touch or feel or actually realize, it also induced a sense of fear. What comes after this existing order that we actually have, you know, been molded by, we have been so used to, that we have made choices in our lives around, that we have invested money and created material conditions around. So like there's all of these different questions that rose that day that I think was also revelatory of our condition more broadly, being both in this condition of oppression, but at the same time, one that has, because it has been so long and the long delay has been has also defined us in many ways. What do we do after Israel? You know, this is a question. I mean, and it's terrifying. It's not only exhilarating. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You know, what meaning in life we will construct. It's you know, it's going to be an existential crisis for everybody. The other thing I would say is that what I was trying to say is that Gaza kind of like moved the world, hollowed out institutions, and I think one of the conditions, the recipes that I think the right wing across the world is using, and this is the problem, of course, and this is why we can be also more dystopian about the future that we can conceive, is that the right wing is more organized, that it has an agenda for the future, that it's trying to attack many of the institutions that are being also hauled out by the fact of genocide in the Gaza Strip. So there's an agenda that a lot of the right wing populist movements or fascist movements, whether it's, you know, MAGA in America or others across, that have, and of course there's a lot of nuance there, and even attitudes among the right wing is changing towards Palestine and America first and Israel first and all of that discussion. But what I'm trying to say is that we don't see necessarily a very organized left and organized Palestinian movement with a lot of institutions. Of course there is. I don't want to undermine the work of many people across, but we need more of that. We need more legal, political, media, whatever infrastructure that we can create wherever we are, to be able to also operate in a way that actually makes sense, dispense our messages, dismantle Israeli narratives, but also work towards forms of transforming our cause into also a form of political power in these areas. That's at least from a Palestinian perspective, but also we are, as Palestinians, invested in the future of the world. We don't want to see something like Gaza happen again anywhere. We want a world where, you know, relations between humanity are different. This is also the stake of our struggle. What we in Palestine are fighting is not only for a state to carve a state or to carve. Of course, we want that, but and there is this kind of self-interest, and of course, Palestinians are, you know, sometimes narcissistic. They're too focused on themselves. but which is natural. But at the same time, there's something that we need to actually also extend to the Arab world, to the world itself. And I think this is one of the things where what makes Palestine special for everybody is that because it's a condensation of many relations, whether capitalism, fantasies of, I don't know, religious and biblical Armageddon, things around, the contestation of the land, its holiness, and things around ideologies that, are crisscross this place, its geography, its, although for me, sometimes it's a boring place, but, it seems to people, it's a very interesting place and very engaging. And I think in many ways that tells us that, Palestine has the potential, and Gaza, of course, in this context, is and has and is changing the world. And I think this is where the opportunity, if something is crumbling or hollowing out, or because of its own excess, it cannot sustain itself, then the question becomes, who fills that void? And that's a question that, needs to be asked on the level of the region. For instance, if the region the resistance axis has suffered some sort of relative defeat, will they be able to come back and still survive this and engage? And if they don't, there's a big question. Who will take the mantle of resistance in the region and back, any struggle over Palestine? What formation, political or otherwise, can we start looking forward to, or organizing, or helping actually set up as Palestinian to maintain some sort of deterrence, to create the conditions for perhaps the continuation and the persistence of the fight and the struggle over Palestine, so it does not end, that even no matter what happens, that there's something still going on. There's also the question of can, in the global or in the imperial core, people organize in a way that actually prevent this right-wing onslaught? Can we have leftist forces actually rise that are more in alliance and cohesion, at least with us, and we can, speak to them and speak to us on an agenda that is forward, progressive, and at the same time centers Palestine? So these are all questions that I think still up in the air. All I'm saying is that some of the conditions that provision a revolutionary potential have risen a lot, that have risen also have been accelerated also because of Gaza. It's not only Gaza that is creating that condition. There's structural components to it. It has to do with the economy, the rise of China, the insecurity in the West, the attempt to reassert the West globally because of the rise of these new powers that are becoming increasingly a challenge in technology, science, and other areas, of course, and in military power as well. But there is a room for us to maneuver ourselves and actually create something, not only for ourselves, but for our world, that actually at least takes us to a better place, hopefully. Yeah.
And if I could add to that, I think what we should not forget, we don't talk enough about it, is the economic crisis. The whole reason for why the right rose so quickly is because of the failure of the left in the 2000s to address the crisis of 2008. So the neoliberal system has been in crisis for the past 20 years, and the answer that has been provided has been fascist, which has happened also historically like that. Now, will it be sustainable? No, but if you look at, for example, a demonstration for Palestine in Italy or Spain, okay, what was fascinating about it, or Ireland, is how much the role of trade unions are in it, okay, and how Palestine now becomes an excuse to talk about economic issues, which is also very similar like how it was in Lebanon, like Lebanon in 1970. Demonstration will start off for Palestine, and they will verge into economic issues about redistribution. So I think the economic crisis we are in is very important. How we address it is going to be very important. And the fascists, whether you like it or not, do not have an answer. They're going to make money, but they cannot solve it. And that's why they're trying to control the media, why they're trying to control the judiciary, at least in the US, why they're trying. But the crisis is deep enough that it needs intervention. Now, the Gulf states are better prepared because they have the money to also meet their population. But Egypt is not prepared for that. Syria is not prepared for that. Iraq is not prepared. So we are in a situation of flux, and what we have, it is to our advantage. I mean, it's true. It is also a moment of despair, and let's also not give Palestine more than what it needs to. Palestine is part of the Arab world, but the Arab world of today is completely different from the Arab world of 1948. What it has in it is that it lost the idealism of the 1950s. It's a loss. It's a big, big loss. And now people are also working much more macro. We thought we can solve problems by going macro. We get the right state and it solves the problem. It doesn't work anymore like that, because the state is a repressive institution. And what we need, we cannot bypass the state. We need to hold the state accountable. And this was the hope of the Arab uprising in 2011. It got crushed. Palestine brought these issues, the same issues, although it's based on Palestine, but the same issues at heart. Who has rights, and how are these rights going to be manifested? And what is the responsibility of the brother and sister in defending those who are under siege and being killed? Okay, this is a question that is pertaining to every Arab, even if they don't have an answer to it, to every citizen of the world. And I think that is gonna, in a context where you are much more educated, much more connected to the world, you have more possibility for intervention. What is missing is the liberatory project. In other words, how you're going to change the state. And Palestine provides a promise, because I do believe Palestine will not be solved if Syria is not solved, but Syria also will not be solved if Palestine is not solved. Palestine offers the possibility of a better future, in the sense that we articulate a project that guarantees and protects diversity and equality for all, versus sectarianism that has failed, and we paid for it. I mean, let's forget the crisis of Syria. The civil war of Syria was far more devastating in terms of numbers of killed people than in Gaza. I doubt that, I mean, I cannot say that, but the massacres that we've seen in Syria are very heavy and had away. I mean, now we're in a new stage. It's not very promising, but it is going into a direction which is not the past. We learned from the past. The question is how we're going to translate these lessons. And this is, as you know, is always going to be a question of contestation, because those who have power will never give up power. And those who don't have it, the important thing is that they're not refusing, they're not giving up. That's what's so shocking for Israel. The Palestinians are not giving up. And guess what? You and I know we cannot give up, even if we wanted. We are here to stay, and everybody is also here to stay. The question is, how can we push all together for a political project that guarantees our humanity and equality and dignity? And so.
Thank you, Leila. That was surprisingly optimistic for a conversation that I felt like wasn't going to be optimistic at all. But we have we have just a couple more minutes left, and there is a question in the chat that I wanted to send Aboud's way. Aboud, you spoke about the economic breakdown in Israel. Can you speak more to that, and whether that's an actually realistic way of thinking about leverage and thinking about pressure?
Well, I mean, I don't think. I mean, first of all, let's put it this way. I mean, there's very contradictory elements coming from Israel, because also economically, it has many levers that it can pull together. But the war is expensive, no? And of course, America is also helping paying the bill for the war. But the more the war continues, the more that expense rises, the more, and the expense is not only in the expenditure in terms of weapons and soldiers. Soldiers leave their work and jobs. That creates a problem. The tourism is also at a halt. Palestinian labor is not working. The construction is at a halt. A lot of the elements of Israeli economy is actually very slowed down, and there's a lot of problems with small businesses and big businesses and even hotels and other elements that are important to actually fundamental segments within Israeli society. So there is economic pressure within Israel. There is increasing, if you want, even poverty among Israelis. Now, having said that, that does not mean that the state will crumble because of an economic crisis. No, like it's just simply one of the levers of pain that Israelis are paying in the name of eliminating the Palestinians. This is one of the elements, including their reputation, of course, and which includes their reputation. So this is one way of looking at this. This doesn't mean we have leverage now around this, but it's much more easier to think of a scenario where if Israel is truly isolated, truly placed to face some consequences economically, that form of isolation will create a calculus among Israeli society that is much different than the one that now exists. We should remember, I mean, yes, there are many Israeli settlers that came here for ideological reasons. There are many people but actually, in fact, also there's a lot of elements of attracting settlers that have to do with healthcare system.
Yes.
with social security, with cheap housing, with a nice home on the top of Al Bira where I live, that is cheap, and you can see the entire coast in front of you, on stolen land, of course, and still go to Jerusalem in 20 minutes and come back. So there's a level of comfort for many of these settlers, not only in the West Bank but also within Israel itself, that also induces and incentivizes many of these settlers and newcomers, alongside sometimes ideology and other cultural factors that they find also interesting. The idea of the gathering of Jews, and we're together here and everybody's Jewish, and things along those lines. But still, the economic and social system is fundamental to the ability of the state to actually attract from the outset of Zionism until this day. For instance, the Soviet Jews that came in the 1990s mostly came out of, first of all, that America closed its doors to the Soviet Jews, but at the same time, Israel opened its doors, and of course, there's a lot of economic incentive around and social incentive around that. So yes, there is a problem when the economy starts crumbling, because not everybody is that committed within Israel to the project in a way that actually risks their own economic well-being or social security or the nature of the healthcare system. So of course, if there is more and more economic isolation, that will lead to two things. The first is it will enter the calculus of the leaders and the political class, whether they want to continue with their own self-effacement, or at the same time, or start becoming more pragmatic and actually try to come back to reality and start to find a new form of political grammar that they can engage with in the Palestinians, retaining our rights, like right of return, all of the different things that we always talk about. Or the second thing is that it will also lead to the reverse immigration out of Israel for many Israelis, which is already a phenomenon that has been rising and will continue to rise, specifically among the liberal secular segments of Israeli society.
Thank you, Aboud. Thank you, Leila. We're over time now, so I wish we could take more questions, but I think we'll have to leave it at that. Before we sign off, I would like to remind everyone that these Policy Labs are a crowdfunded program of Al-Shabaka, so we'd be super grateful for any contributions that you can make. If you're able to donate, a button should appear on your screen somewhere. Anyways, as we sign off, please keep an eye out for further writing from Aboud and Leila, and for further programming from Al-Shabaka. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.